David McLaughlin is my guest. He's a former chief of staff to Brian Mulroney, listening in, laughing as well. You know, it's interesting to see Carney trying to do this, to pivot, wrapping up that first G7 summit. I mean, you're no stranger to these kinds of summits. Your take on how it went? Canada was really on the world stage, so was Carney.
Yeah, I think the Prime Minister had a pretty good first summit. I mean, for his first formal outing, he is clearly bringing a degree of realism, Todd, to the whole process and to Canada's foreign policy and foreign relations that I think hadn't been seen before. So you see the communique. I mean, there was really no G7 communique. It's a G6. In many ways, you know, as you said, with the U.S. president departing early, there were some joint statements on some more, I'll call them tier 2 issues, AI, critical minerals, migrant smuggling, etc. But on the big stuff, the big global trade disruption, the global conflicts that are in play, in like Ukraine, and obviously Mr. President Zelensky didn't get his meeting, even though he was invited. You know, on those big issues, it is not a G7. It is really a G6, and that is showing the kind of change and disruption that President Trump has brought to the whole process. So we're in a period of transition here for not just Canada and the world, but for even these kinds of bodies, such as the G7.
I wonder what you make as well about, you know, all the conversation in recent months, David, about Canada. You know, a lot of attention, you know, good or bad, that we're not always used to, but largely as a result of what's happened with President Trump, but also, you know, a changeover of power with Justin Trudeau into Mark Carney, a man who is very familiar with leaders in Europe as well, and what it means for Canada. You know, Carney said something interesting at that summit. He said, you know, we are at sort of a pivot point in history.
Yeah, I think he actually believes that very strongly. I mean, he has talked about that for some time, like as he got into the leadership race and then became prime minister and then in the election campaign. And he's carrying that through. He really does want to undertake a transformational agenda for the country, build, baby, build, right? You know, in terms of infrastructure and other things. So he's taking that same kind of realism, as I put it, but this understanding that we're at this pivot, this hinge moment in the world. And he would know that, having very well, having been through, you might say, other hinge moments as a governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, you know, financial crises, economic crises. He saw Brexit not work very well in the UK. So he is clearly very, you know, cold-eyed on this, looking at the US and saying, you know, we're in a period of disruption and we have to do something about it in terms of making Canada more resilient. And so it's more of a kind of I'll say it's not a Canada first thing, but he's looking a more inward, more realistically, rather than just trying to refresh international institutions and saying that's the only way to go, which I think was the approach of the Prime Minister Trudeau.
Hey, what do you make of this so-called 30-day timeline, David, about a new economic and security deal with the United States? That was also discussed by President Trump and the Prime Minister. Your thoughts on what that may or may not mean?
We don't know. I mean, it's 30 days. That might become 60 days, might become 90 days. I mean, what I think the Prime Minister and the government of Canada is trying to do is keep some kind of process in play that they can actually have some negotiating runway to either find out what the U.S. president and the administration really want to do about tariffs, whether there's any room to, to ameliorate, to change the U.S. approach, but also gives them a chance to perhaps put together a larger package. And that's where a larger package, for example, dealing with security issues, border issues, etc. Now, we have done those on one-off pieces, you know, the fentanyl czar and other kinds of things. And that's where President Trump, you know, he talked about, well, I'm a tariff guy. Mark Carney, like, he wants to do something a little more complex. Maybe that's the complexity piece that he is referring to, and that Prime Minister Carney in Canada is trying to link these things together to try to get a more stable package for the longer term. We'll see if that, you know, can be done. 30 days is not a lot of runway, but at least it's some runway.
David, always great to see you. Appreciate your insights here with us on CTV News.